Welcome to episode number 229, where I'm talking to Jennica about her work in aquaculture and combating climate change, looking into seaweed to help protect ocean health as a food and as a biofuel, and how she uses Ayurvedic principles in her work. A really interesting conversation, so please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to Jennica, who is a scientist, a farmer, and most importantly, a mom. She is a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology from Florida Atlantic University and a Master of Science from the University of Florida, where she studied aquaculture and fish health. Jennica's 20-year career in aquaculture industry includes work in the private and public sectors. She's worked as a commercial fish farmer and as a contractor for the National Ocean Service, part of the United States National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Currently, she is the research director for Ocean Era, a Hawaii-based small business that focuses on developing and commercializing ways that marine aquaculture can combat climate change and decrease pressure on wild fisheries. Jennica, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and speak with you today.
Well, I'm excited to have you on with this conversation because, as I mentioned previously, I really believe that planetary health is an extension of our own holistic health because we are part of nature. And as we can see what's happening in the world right now, it's affecting our health. And so this is why I really want to share your work today and also how you're integrating your knowledge of Ayurveda into your work. But let's start, Jennica. Well, can you explain to us, please, about your work in aquaculture, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Aquaculture, it's a really broad term. You know, it's basically the same as agriculture. Agriculture is farming on land. Aquaculture is farming in the water. So it can be anything from farming fish in the ocean to fish in lakes. The beautiful fish that are in many people's fish tanks also come from aquaculture. It's quite a broad term. What I do specifically is work in marine aquaculture. I work with farming both fish and seaweed. And I, as you mentioned, I'm here in Hawaii, so my work focuses on, warm water, marine finfish, warm water seaweed, and both work offshore and on land.
Great. And so tell us a bit about what your work involves.
Sure. This is such a pertinent topic, Colette. Thank you so much for bringing it up because our planet is like 70 or even more, 75% ocean. And so when we talk about planetary health, we really need to consider the ocean as well. And, I grew up in South Florida in the US, and I was able to see just a steady decline in like the health of the reefs and the areas surrounding where I grew up. And it was pretty obvious for me by the time I was 16, 17 years old. I was like, oh, I'm going to be a marine biologist. I want to work with the oceans. And it wasn't much longer after that I learned about aquaculture and thought, that it could be a really great way to help relieve the pressure on wild fisheries, and help to do some good with restoration. But, again, aquaculture is such a broad term. Here in Hawaii, there's ancient aquaculture systems that have been, practiced and built for millennia. And it's part of the greater holistic management of our land and watershed systems. So, certainly I'd love to tell you about what we do here at Ocean Era and the work that we're doing, but, I hope that what I'm speaking about, doesn't become too pointed. Aquaculture is a wonderful thing that's practiced all over the world. And again, when it's done properly, which is really the key, when it's done properly, it can really help people and its surrounding environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. We need people in different industries who are very conscious about the impact, the holistic impact on all systems, right? So please do tell us a little bit about your work there in Ocean Era.
So the mission of our company is similar to what you said in the introduction, very much to find ways that marine aquaculture can help combat climate change and can help decrease the impact on wild capture fisheries. I think we all know that there just aren't so many fish in the ocean to feed everybody that wants to eat them, and that most of the wild fisheries have been tapped out. We can't just keep fishing anymore. But it is a wonderful, healthy source of protein for people. And so we really think that by farming fish, we can help supplement what's being captured in the wild. Certainly, I love fishing. I don't want to say people should not fish. I don't think that's realistic. And so that's why I first got into aquaculture. How can I help feed people without harming the environment and let some of those wild fish still be wild? So here at Ocean Era, our history is really in fish farming. We've developed offshore fish farms here in Hawaii and in Mexico. But we also come to realize the importance of farming seaweed and just the myriad of benefits that it can have for its surrounding environment and for kind of planetary health in general. And so about probably 5 or 6 years ago, the company really started getting into seaweed farming as well.
That's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about seaweed. I know it's been used a lot more, and there's a lot more experimentation going on with seaweed, not only in culinary field, but also in your own work.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a hot topic right now. Mm-hmm. And, before we go too much further into seaweed, I just want to say, I do appreciate that you're willing to have the conversation that also involves farming fish. I know you're plant-based. Many of the listeners are plant-based. So thank you for your willingness to have the conversation and the willingness for people to listen, because I am farming fish for food for people, but certainly, we do it with the utmost respect and care and love for our animals, which is really important, and kind of integrate some of those Ayurvedic principles for their holistic health.
Yeah. And I agree. And I don't think it's a matter of, completely eliminating a certain food product, that it's more like, how do we do this responsibly?
Exactly. So yes. Seaweed is a super hot topic right now as far as its ingredients in food and cosmetics. And also how it can be used to work with maybe ocean health. And, the work that we're doing here, we're a small company, but we're part of this greater group of people around the world who's recognizing the importance of ocean health. And while we have treated our ocean with a bit of abuse, and we have, not taken care of the waters, we've not taken care of the fish for a while, the ocean is no victim here. She is going to be a major part of helping to heal the planet. And so even, the United Nations has stated that from 2021 to 2030 is the decade of ocean science. Let's learn about this. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the surface of the ocean seas.
Crazy.
So yeah. So it's time to really start to understand what we have and to integrate ocean stewardship and ocean uses into our planetary health. So what we've been doing here stems from a really interesting program. The seaweed work we're doing here stems from an interesting program through the U.S. Department of Energy they recognize that we cannot keep burning fossil fuels. And they set forth a program to start to develop offshore seaweed aquaculture in the hopes that it might be able to produce enough mass for biofuel. So this is a project, it's like probably 30, 40 years looking forward. But, the U.S. federal government knows that most businesses can't just say, hey, I'm going to do this, 30-year outlook program. Let's see what happens. So they decide to fund businesses as well as universities and organizations who might be able to help solve some of the issues involved with seaweed aquaculture production, also its processing, where we can put it in the ocean so it won't be damaging. So it's quite a big program. And that's what really spurred our companies, diving into seaweed aquaculture. We all know seaweed aquaculture happens very much in the tropics, actually throughout the world. But, mostly it's done in tropical aquaculture is done in Southeast Asia and in China. There isn't a ton of experience with it here in the Americas. So that's why we're trying to figure out how it will work kind of with the, maybe say, American business model, for maybe lack of a better word. So we are using native Hawaiian species that we've basically, collected off the rocks here near our office or used samples from friends on maybe some of the other islands to see how we can get it to grow in large scale. What does it need to thrive? And so we've been making a good go of it for the past several years. And, coming back to this company as a fish farmer and now getting to work with the seaweed has been absolutely thrilling for me. Like, I'm just learning so much every day. And we're also integrating our seaweed aquaculture work with our fish culture work, because in nature, they work in one big system. Right. So we're trying to model that a little bit every day here with the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And that's the important thing, right, Jennica, is that nature works as a complete system. And so when we start to work with nature, we have to understand that it's a part of a bigger ecosystem and everything has a place.
Exactly. It's pretty funny. We're doing work here where we have put together a system where we have fish in tanks. Mm-hmm. And we feed them a prepared diet, like a pelleted feed that kind of looks like dog food. And then the effluent water from those fish go onto, tanks with our seaweed. We just started this, experiment maybe a month ago, and the seaweed that's in this experiment is doing fabulously. Well, okay, no big surprise, right? Like, that's how it works in nature. Fish release fish release nitrogen. Nitrogen is needed by the seaweed to grow. And so we've been even here at our work where we know it's all going to come together. We've, spent a couple of years with fish on one side and seaweed on the other. We put it together and now it's this big, beautiful thing. And the seaweed's doing great. And it cleans up the water that's coming out of the fish tanks. Mm. And that's where this type of polyculture, growing more than one species together is, the way of the future for some people. And in some situations, it just makes a lot of sense. Fish aquaculture has a pretty bad reputation, and sometimes it's been deserved, for polluting the environment around the fish farm. And seaweed is a natural way to help mitigate some of that. Some of it, of course, can be mitigated through proper management and proper, siting of the farm. But, fish pee, it's what happens. And so those dissolved nutrients can go into growing the seaweed, and the seaweed isn't going to over extract anything from its environment. So it's beautiful to see it all coming together. And nothing that I'm saying right now is groundbreaking. Like, we all know that this is how it's going to work together, but it's fun for us to see it happening here. And especially for me, who in recent years, Ayurveda has become so important in my life that I can see how its principles really project to pretty much everything. When I was in graduate school, I was studying with fish veterinarians, and fish health was very holistic. The first thing I learned was if you've got to give your fish antibiotics, there's something else going on. Mm-hmm. That system is out of balance. It's all about balance. That's what aquaculture for me. It's so fun because when you're doing it well, you've kind of gotten that balance right. And, so learning about fish medicine, like, I knew 20 years ago that stress was important for my animals' health. We had to reduce stress. We had to make sure they had the proper nutrition. We had to make sure they had the proper environment. And it's interesting that people, we don't always think about that for ourselves. So we had a good understanding for fish, and now finally we're understanding that it's important for us as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so how do you reduce stress in the environment?
The work that we're doing right now, we're located at a place here on the westernmost tip of Hawaii Island, and it's an incredible place that was built in the 1970s. They built it because of the first oil crisis. Here in Hawaii, we have warm surface seawater, but we have very deep oceans, very close to land. That deep water is quite cold. So someone had a wonderful idea that you can use this temperature gradient to run turbines. And so it's called ocean thermal energy conversion. It's a way to produce energy, not requiring fossil fuel.
Wow.
But many of these environmental initiatives have happened because that first oil crisis, when oil prices went back down, people kind of lost interest. But, we still have this incredible facility that's bringing up warm surface seawater and cold deep seawater. And so where I'm at now, it's an ocean science park. There are many aquaculture facilities, many other fabulous research facilities here. And it's been a great place to come and learn and see the diversity of what can happen when we as people have these resources available to us.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, everything from abalone to fish to oysters to engineering firms and infrasound laboratories. Sound is something I hope to talk a little bit about later because it's important with Ayurveda and it's so important for animals in the ocean as well. So it's quite an inspiring place to work.
Wow. And so I noted down, I want to come back and talk about sound. But so the seaweed work, I want to go back to the fact that it could be used as a biofuel, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And like you said, it could be a 30-year-long project, but that's very exciting.
It is. Biofuels, when everything we're talking about years ago, people were talking about using corn as a biofuel. And okay, it's great. That's not a fossil fuel, but we're competing with food for people. Yes. It requires a lot of water. It requires a lot of land space. And with seaweed, we don't need any fresh water. Or virtually no fresh water. You might need some in processing, but you don't need fresh water to grow it. You don't need land space to grow it.
Right.
It just grows from the nutrients that are in the ocean. It would be then a carbon neutral fuel source. So certainly it would be burned. It could release carbon back into the atmosphere, but we're not pulling carbon from geologic formations to burn like we do with fossil fuels. So it's potential for a carbon neutral fuel source, which is huge. So
and it sequesters carbon.
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm. No, that's okay. It does sequester carbon. That's one of the other things with seaweed is it can be used for so many things. Once you grow it, it takes that carbon and those other nutrients, which could, when there's too many nutrients, it can be detrimental. So seaweed can pull the carbon and the nutrients from the water it's grown in. And then if you use seaweed as a food, the carbon does not get re-released. If you use seaweed as a building material, the carbon does not get re-released. So it will sequester carbon. And again, it will, growing anything out in the ocean is not easy. It's a lot of work. And there's a lot of, there's some infrastructure that has to go along with it. But, compared to what we're doing now, the potential is endless. And so, seaweed is used, can be used for fuel. It can also be used for bioremediation. I work with some people who were growing seaweed out in Long Island Sound in the U.S. Northeast. So just off of New York City, it's a hugely polluted waterway. And this seaweed can be used to kind of take up the excess nutrients, also some of the heavy metals, some of the things that we don't want in the water anymore. The seaweed can help grab that. Of course, we would not want to eat that seaweed. It would go somewhere else, but it can be used to just help clean the environment. And there's several types of species in aquaculture that can do that very thing.
Yeah, that's so exciting. All this material that's been right under our nose all the time.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, like, coming from Ireland, we have a big, there's a seaweed industry there as well, but it would have been used a lot in the past. But then, of course, we think we know better and start introducing new forms of fertilizer and so on, because it would have been used as a fertilizer in the past. So yeah, it's amazing to see that we need to go backwards in order to go forwards.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Let's look behind to move forward, because there is so much knowledge there that, maybe just over the past 100, 200 years, we kind of got away from, or thought it wasn't valid. And it's certainly, just like Ayurveda, of course, is extremely valid. Just because things weren't based on like Newtonian physics doesn't mean that it isn't extremely valuable and useful information.
Absolutely. Yes. And talking about, going back to this elder wisdom, this ancient wisdom, you mentioned a moment ago about sound and how that's so important for marine life and communication in the oceans. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
Well, sure. And, this is something that, of course, we know how important sound is in the ocean, and we know how damaging it can be when used improperly, or when used without care for what's around. When people are exploring for places where there's oil, when people are doing like offshore drilling, they have to use really hardcore, gnarly sound to see what's underneath the bedrock. And if animals are around, it can really hurt them, if not kill them.
Yeah.
But then maybe on the other side, if I have animals here that I want to make more comfortable, that I want to make happy, how can I use sound to do that? And there are some animals, such as seahorses. People like to farm seahorses for fish tanks or for conservation. They are extremely sensitive to the sounds around them. I've seen here with my own fish, when there was construction near our farm, they were using like a jackhammer to work on the bedrock. The fish stopped spawning.
Wow.
So we can see that it can affect them. It can travel so far. So I'd like to look into how I can use it in a positive way. Is there something I can do to help balance their environment, help make their environment more comfortable, that make them less stressed? Or perhaps if it's brood fish, the parents, it might make them spawn more regularly. This is something I hope to explore. Certainly, I haven't gotten to do enough yet with the research, but it's one place we're going to go, because again, animal health. If we're growing food for people, the animals that are going to become that food, they need to be happy and healthy. Just, it just says energy transfers, right? So we want 100%. To have healthy fish. And, even if you look at the economics of it, animals that are healthy grow faster. If they grow faster, they get to the market faster. And even if we only want to look at profit margins, it's good for profit margins.
And they reproduce more.
Exactly. And, some work's been coming out just in recent months about the importance of sound on the reef, and that some fish, when they're babies, will settle onto a reef because of the sounds that they hear. So how can we use that as our young fish are starting to grow, to make them comfortable and to help them grow well? So it's a fascinating thing to get into.
It is fascinating, and just such an interesting for you and your work to see, oh my goodness, this is like the holistic view that you have to have on making sure the environment is right. The fish are happy, not stressed, so that you're looking at every aspect of the environment in order to produce healthy fish. And what I'd love to talk about now is the nutrition side of that.
Yes. Nutrition is everything,
right.
And of course we know this coming from Ayurveda. And people have a pretty good idea about it for their farm animals too. But it's fun to try to find that balance. And with fish farming in particular, their feed is at the crux of absolutely everything positive and negative. If fish are overfed, not only is it, bad for a farmer's profits, but it can be very damaging to the environment. If I've got a cage of fish out in the ocean, I overfeed them. That feed settles to the ocean floor. It begins to decompose, and it can, if done for a long enough time, it can kill off the creatures that are living in the sediment below the farm. And that is one thing that has happened in many farms in the past. One of the reasons fish farming has gotten a bad reputation, because in the early days, farms were sited in nearshore shallow water. And there were some instances where it would take years for the benthos to kind of heal and to have those little worms and snails that like to live in the substrate. It took years for them to come back. And that's what we are getting away from. Like, we know we can't do that. No one wants to do that. So it's kind of been a steep learning curve. But, the feed will tie the farmer. It can be one small farmer out in the middle of the ocean in Hawaii, but it'll tie us to these global commodity food markets because of the price of the ingredients that goes into feed. So it really is, as I said, at kind of the crux of everything. Also, for many fish, the fish that we farm like to eat other fish, so they require a lot of protein. And often that was coming from fish meal and fish oil that came from other wild captured fish. So right, we can't fish any more fish. So how are we going to, grow aquaculture if we depend on wild fish? So most of my research over the past 15 years has been looking at fish nutrition. How can we get away from only using fish meal and fish oil? How do we diversify the crops then, or the different products that can go into the fish food to minimize our pressure that we put on wild resources, but also provide the best health for our animals? And so it's been wonderful to see where the industry is going, and how, I'm working with farmers in Nebraska who might grow soy, who might grow corn, who might grow flax, who might grow chicken. And how can we put all of these pieces together to use every part of the plant or every part of the animal to help grow food for people? And this has been so eye-opening for me. And again, how are we doing the best by our fish and by our planet by feeding them the right way? And it really all comes down to nutrition for the fish.
Right. And making sure that those crops are non-GMO and, raised healthily, so that, because every chink in the chain has an effect on the end product, right? And then on our health.
Exactly. And, that's one of the kind of arguments against aquaculture. Well, if you're growing fish, even if you're feeding them agricultural grains, you're still, requiring more agriculture. And that might mean more water, or that might mean more fertilizer. And I don't have an easy answer for that. I don't know that there is. I think that's why it's important to diversify what goes into, not only what goes into us as food, but also what goes into the fish. So we're not taxing one specific resource.
Yeah. That's an important point, is diversification. Like you said, so you're not really straining one resource. And so fish, they're not completely herbivore.
We have actually, they are not, at least the ones that I'll get to that. I am working with a fish now and trying to domesticate one that is an herbivore. But generally speaking, even fish that are herbivores, marine fish, they need certain, amino acids or fatty acids that are primarily found in the marine environment. So even a little bit of, fish meal or fish oil would go into a diet for some herbivorous fish, not all. But we have been able to grow what is traditionally a marine carnivore on a totally plant-based diet. We've done that now several times on a research scale, and we know it's something that can definitely be scalable to commercial farms. And we're going to start some more work with that here in the next coming months, actually, to see, to really grow fish from, 100 grams up to a harvest size, say 2 kilos, with a plant-based diet. And it's because it's really all about balancing amino acids and fatty acids. And I understand that we're really getting into processed food here, which really for Ayurveda is not the direction that people will go. But it's something that frankly is required for aquaculture legally. I can't just throw fish into a cage full of fish out in the ocean. They have to have a prepared diet that has less. It releases less debris into the environment. So. But it allows us to diversify what we're giving them, and it allows us to use, fishery byproducts that used to go in the trash. Now we can use that to go into our fish feed. So it's great the way that we're able to conserve resources that way. And starting to grow carnivorous fish on a primarily plant-based diet. And algae comes into all of this too. Seaweeds and microalgae are able to grow some of these fatty acids and proteins that used to come from fish meal and fish oil.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
It is. And again, aquaculture, lots of people don't know much about it, but it really is everywhere. Even out in the deserts of Arizona, they're growing microalgae that can become just fantastic food supplements and nutraceuticals. So it's all over the place and covers anything from microalgae up to, huge fish.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah. Cause I know I didn't know a lot about aquaculture and learning a lot today. And I know even in the past, when I did eat fish years ago, that it was always, when I hear about farmed fish, it was always like, oh, I always thought that was a bad thing. And I know this is not your line of work now. You have worked in fish farms before, correct?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I managed a commercial fish farm for years, and I'm still, the work that we do here ultimately is, we hope that it can help other people who want to grow fish. And we are even considering, in the next couple of years, doing our own commercial farm that would be fish and seaweed.
Okay. So I know it's a question I had, and I feel it'd be interesting for people to hear. Do you have advice when choosing fish? Because it's so hard, I think, for people, if they are eating fish, what to choose and what does it mean, all these different terms?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the bad rap that aquaculture has, it came for a reason, and there's truth to it. Generally, the industry has gotten away from some of those practices, but I think the seafood certifications, they work. So things that are Aquaculture Stewardship Council certified, things that are best aquaculture practices certified. Those are big ones here in the U.S. They literally have auditors come out to the farm and look and see what you're doing to make sure that you're not having environmental impact. Anything that's grown in the U.S. as well as in Europe is pretty heavily regulated. So there is definite limitations to what any impact the farms can have on their surrounding environment. And so again, the seafood labels are a good place to start.
Okay, and you see them on the packaging.
Yep.
Okay.
There'll be a little, some of them, it's usually like a little circle with a fish on it or a check mark on it. Similarly, if you're eating wild fish, stuff that has been certified through the Marine Stewardship Council, and Friend of the Sea is a big one in Europe. That's a great place to start. I don't want to, I'm not trying to like badmouth anybody, because again, everybody's doing the best that they can in most cases. Stuff that has been caught in U.S. waters, I think is so heavily regulated. If you're buying it from a capture fishery in the U.S., you're probably making a really good choice.
Okay.
I think similarly in Europe, stuff is pretty heavily regulated. There are, the higher up the food chain you get, so like tuna and stuff like that, it is a wonderful food source, but most of that is ranch. So they'll capture young tuna and kind of fatten them up for however many months in pens, and then they go into the market. I think that is, again, they do the best that they can as far as not having environmental impact, but they are using fish to feed fish. So just like anything, you're not going to eat tuna 5 times a week. Have it once a week, have it once every 2 weeks. Right. To kind of, if you want to minimize your own impact. But to answer your question, the labels are a really good place to start. I think they have forced the aquaculture industry to look at its practices and to continue to improve those practices. And many of these, especially Aquaculture Stewardship Council, is recognized around the world. So I know we work with partners in Japan who raise yellowtail, they call them buri or kampachi or hamachi. They even began working with Aquaculture Stewardship Council towards making realistic goals to continue to improve their practices to minimize environmental impact.
Okay, that's great information. Very, very helpful. I didn't even know those kind of seals of approval existed. So that's really good, because I think it can be very confusing for people when choosing what does it mean? What do all these signs mean? So very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, a lot of the cultured fish comes from other countries. The U.S. and Europe, we import massive amounts of our seafood. A lot of it comes from China and other Southeast Asian nations. So that's where, because we don't always fully understand the regulations and the practices, that's where you can kind of lean on those labels to give guidance.
Exactly. Yeah. Really helpful. Thank you. Okay. And now I'd love to talk a bit more about how Ayurveda has played an important part in your personal life. I know that it has. And also, how are you integrating these Ayurvedic principles into your work?
Yeah. Well, Ayurveda came into my life a big part because of you. I had been, in 2017, I left Hawaii. My husband, our 6-month-old son, and I moved to North Carolina so I could work with the National Ocean Service. And becoming a new mom and moving to a new place and having a new job really threw me for a loop. Mm-hmm. And I had a pretty rough couple of years, just kind of physically and mentally. And I knew that wasn't right. I knew I deserved to be happy. And I started working, with a fantastic therapist for a few months. And then when we felt that that was done, I knew I wasn't done. And what can I do to continue to grow? And I immediately looked to yoga and to Ayurveda. Yoga had been important to me for many years. And I had grabbed a book about Ayurveda, probably 15 years ago. And it wasn't the right time for me, but I always kept it on my bookshelf. And then, again, I was having a rough time a few years ago, and I knew that I needed to get better. And I picked up this Ayurveda book, and I was like, oh, this is starting to ring true now. And I started searching around on the internet, and I found your podcast. And I was listening to your podcast. I was sitting there. I was like on the treadmill at the gym one morning, and you explained, I think it was about pitta burnout. And you basically explained everything I had done and eaten in that past week. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to call this woman, And so that's when I started working with you as a client, and then started learning a bit more about Ayurveda on my own. And I'm a biologist through and through. I mean, people who knew me at 3 years old knew I was going to be a biologist, and biology means the study of life. And Ayurveda, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but Ayurveda means the knowledge of life.
Yep.
And so it just, as I started learning about this, I've become thrilled because, Ayurveda in the grossest, most physical form is a different type of physiology. And so I learned physiology in colleges in the United States. It's all based on, microscopes and stuff like that, and basically Newtonian physics. But then I start to learn about Ayurveda, and it's just this whole other dimension to how we work. And so I have so much to learn, and I'm really to the point where I might like to go get some more formal education in Ayurveda, because I'm just fascinated by it. And it just shows things, as we keep saying, more holistically. But as I was learning about Ayurveda, it was a time when I was working with the Ocean Service, and I was primarily a desk job. I wasn't working with animals very much. So then, last year when I moved back to Hawaii and was working with Ocean Era, and I'm with fish every day, and I'm with the seaweed every day, just things keep popping up, like, oh my gosh, the fish, when we've held them on land for a long time, fish, or that farm fish, don't always spawn as well as wild fish. So what's going on? Like, we can use clues from Ayurveda to start to really figure this stuff out. And I think it will really help accelerate research into animal welfare.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think you mentioned that in an email to me, and that's where this kind of recording came from, is you mentioned how you were seeing how the environment was affecting your fish. And and how, you're so fascinated by the principles of Ayurveda and applying them to your work, and how, we look at our own environment and how it affects us and affects our energy and affects us on every level. And that you saw that same thing happening with the fish.
Yeah. Well, so the fish that we work with are not domesticated, so some fish like Atlantic salmon who have been farmed for many generations, or trout or tilapia, you can call up a company and they have fish that they have grown for generations, and they can send you eggs or they can send you fingerlings. So some of these animals, they have been farmed for a long time, not the ones that I work with. So for us to capture brood stock, we have to capture brood stock. We go to the wild and catch wild fish. We bring them on land, and often, fortunately, they start spawning on their own. But of course, we have tried to keep our own first generation of fish. We don't want to have to keep catching from the wild. We tried to keep them, but they just, as they mature, they just don't spawn as well. And so, nutrition is probably a pretty obvious place to start. We can't provide as diverse a diet as they get in the wild. Exercise is a pretty clear place to start. They are fish that used to, swim for tens, if not hundreds of miles, and now we keep them in tanks. So those are some pretty low-hanging fruit that we can continue to look for fixing. But then how can Ayurveda help us with some of these other clues that we're getting? Maybe there's a condition that we see kind of regularly, A fish might become egg bound. So she produces the eggs, but she can't release them. What would be, and I don't know Ayurveda well enough to answer this question, but what clue is that? What doshic imbalance might there be? And with that, or wherever that might come from, could that give me a clue to what that animal might need? Maybe I can find that ingredient to put in their food, or maybe I can offer them something else in the environment that might help balance that. So that's one easy example of where Ayurveda can kind of help with our animal welfare.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's like, does the fish perceive that the environment is not conducive to releasing those eggs?
Mm-hmm. Or is it simply behavior? Do we not have the right mix of males and females? Or the tank's not big enough, or, things like that. And I just, many people work on this problem. It's not just, us at our company. It's not really novel, unfortunately, but I don't think many people come at it with a kind of holistic health lens, or it's certainly not within Ayurvedic lens. I ask about Ayurveda and aquaculture all the time, and people kind of look at me funny. They've not heard of one or the other or both. So I really appreciate having the conversation with you today.
So, Jennica, I'd love to talk a little bit more about how we're going into combating climate change. And we've already talked a little bit about this, but more ways your work is combating climate change and decreasing pressures on the wild fisheries. I know you mentioned a lot, like the seaweed already.
Absolutely. Well, some of the things, and I don't want to just talk about what we're doing, like that there's wonderful groups and companies all across the world doing work with aquaculture. So I can just talk about all of that I can think of. And so, for climate change and fisheries, a big thing, we need to decrease the amount of carbon, specifically CO2, in our environment. It's CO2 that has caused ocean acidification. And there are places in, the northwestern parts of the United States that oysters can't even grow anymore because when they're little, the pH of the ocean is too low for their shells to form.
Yeah, this is a big issue.
It's a huge issue. And that's where seaweed can help, because seaweed soaks up the CO2 from the environment and captures it in its tissues. So there's been research to show that in the areas surrounding seaweed farms, the pH of the water is actually a bit higher, so less acidic. So it does have local, very distinct impacts on ocean acidification. And then, of course, if it is grown in a larger scale, it will have larger impacts. Similarly, aquaculture, if we're not, if aquaculture is produced nearby and it doesn't have to fly halfway around the world to get to a market, then you're going to decrease transportation and shipping costs. So that's kind of a bigger scale thing. But I said, not people don't know, but there's lots of oyster farms, mussel farms, seaweed farms, and fish farms kind of everywhere if you start to look. The Nature Conservancy has been doing some incredible work on restorative aquaculture, growing things like seaweed and oysters to not only provide food for people, but again, also to suck up nutrients and to take up carbon from the surrounding environment. And some of the work that they've been doing in the Caribbean, in Belize, has also shown that these seaweed farms are becoming structure for other animals to settle. So they'll find young lobster or small fish living around at the seaweed farms because it's structure. And it's a place that they can safely go and grow up with not so much pressure from predators. And so there's a possibility, again, if done right and balanced correctly, that some farms can even serve as almost like a little nursery for other species, which is always helpful for sure. There's work being done in New Zealand, the country is famous for mussel farming, and they have been doing research to see how mussels that were traditionally there, that had been basically trawled or scraped off the seabed for fishing, however many decades ago, that didn't recover. But the mussel farms might be helping some of that to recover. And also similarly, they form a structure for fish to swim around where they can get away from predators. They also do a really nice job, or at least some farms in New Zealand, I think, I don't know if it's all, do a nice job that they'll let people come and fish near their farm. So they're not excluding fishermen. They just ask the fishermen to please, respect their hardware, respect their employees. Let's not get anyone in danger. But if you still want to come fish, go for it. And that's farms here in Hawaii. We do the same thing. We ask people not to, don't tie up to the fish cages. Certainly, please don't try to come steal the fish. But if you want to troll by and catch bait or something like that from something that's swimming nearby, no problem. Like, let's all work together.
Right.
Biggest one, really, carbon sequestration from that seaweed. It is, the more I learn about this stuff, and of course, there's hundreds of types, and it's everywhere, and it's delicious, and it's different. I mean, it's really something that will truly help the planet.
So I also wanted to ask you about where people can find out more, but is there anything else you wanted to cover before I ask that?
I don't think so. This has been so great to talk about. And certainly, I'm really looking to learn. So if you or any listeners think, oh gosh, Jen, here, you should look into this, or I know about Ayurveda and agriculture here, you can learn more this way, please, send it my way. Let me know. Because I know there's Vedic agriculture practices that I've seen just, that are being kind of reintroduced here in the US in certain places, as well as in India. I know that, thousands of years ago, when people were practicing Ayurveda, people were growing fish. And I bet there's some insight out there somewhere that we can apply. But I think that's it. I just so appreciate being able to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to get insight into this. I think it's really important. The subject of planetary health, as I say, is as important as our own health, and for people to understand what's going on out there. And it's a very positive conversation, and looking into how there are so many people working in protecting the oceans, and also how can we be more conscious and still produce food, but be more conscious and be more holistic in its nature.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. Well, Jennica, let people know where they can find out more about you if they want to connect with you, and more about what we discussed today, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my company's website is www.ocean-era.com. My email address is just my name, Jennica, Jennica @ocean-era.com. And then there's a bunch of really cool, informative websites that I'd be happy to share with you if you want to put them in the show notes for people to look into this type of stuff.
Great.
To just learn a little bit more and see some of these incredible efforts that people are doing around the world.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd love to add those in. I think it's great if we all educate ourselves on these different missions, and also just as a way of communicating with each other. If anybody does know of any Vedic practices or somebody that Jennica should speak to, let's connect them so we can, spread this wisdom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Colette.
It's been a pleasure. So the takeaway from today is there is lots of positive work happening out there in the world. If you are looking for fish, buy local, right? Reduce your carbon footprint and look for the labels, right, Jen?
Yep. The labels, they help. Yep.
Can you repeat those labels again for me?
Yes, sure. There's the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, probably abbreviated ASC.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the Marine Stewardship Council for Wild Fisheries, MSC. And usually I think it's a bluish green circle with a big check mark on it, I think. And there's also the Best Aquaculture Practices certification. That's through the Global Aquaculture Alliance, so BAP. And in Europe, also Friends of the Sea is one that I've worked with a little bit that I know, especially for capture fisheries, is a good one.
Excellent. Jennica, thank you so much for sharing all this information today. I hope somebody connects with you. They can either contact me or Jennica personally, if they know somebody that Jennica should talk to, because she is so interested in working more with the principles of Ayurveda in her work. And I think that's amazing. And I love how through your own personal journey with Ayurveda, you're integrating into your own work. And this is what we love to see, that ancient wisdom spread out into different areas.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been absolutely great. Just aloha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennica. Take good care of yourself and keep doing that good work in the world.
Will do.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jennica, and please check out the show notes for all the links that she mentioned there. Lots of valuable information. And if you think this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them so we can spread this wisdom. Also, check out the link in the show notes to my websites where you can find my online services, online consultations, at-home cleanses tailored to you, and also the Daily Habits for a Holistic Health program. Or just visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Also, you can join me over on social media under Elements Healing and Wellbeing on Instagram and Facebook. Finally, if you are enjoying the content, I would really appreciate a rating and review. That way, more people can find the podcast and we can spread this wisdom of Ayurveda. So if you have time right now, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast. It would be really fantastic. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.